As you'll know, I'm sure that we've been going through the book of James, and we come now to a section and towards the end of the book, and James has been using in different places characteristic bluntness in some of the things he's saying, and from here and there his language is, well, you could say is you're ferocious, and just his turn of phrase and the way that he says things. I sometimes feel when I'm reading James, there's a huge amount in it, actually. Sometimes I feel I'm just scratching the surface, and certainly when we've gone through it, we've not quite skimmed some bits, but some bits we've looked at in more depth than others. It's important in every part of James that we understand it in terms of his overall aim and purpose. And as I'm sure you remember, I've been saying previously that James is writing, this is James, Jesus' brother, who's writing. That's the general conclusion. And he was the leader of the early church. So this isn't the James that we read of in the Gospels. This is Jesus' brother. There was more than one James. And he's writing to Jewish believers. Issues, anti-Semitic issues, because they're Jewish also. So that brings its issues. They have the issues that are connected with being a Jewish believer, in that's not shared by all members of the Jewish community, and so there were issues that were and trials that came with that. And of course there's all the natural and ordinary issues of life that everybody else has to face. Money and finances and health and family, and on it goes. And James is seeking to guide us in a very real practical wisdom for how to negotiate the various issues and the ups and downs and the trials that we face. And key in that is our attitude, how we're looking at our situations, how we look at ourselves, and how we're relating, of course, to God. Because God is there and He's with us. We're not alone in anything that we face, and the closer we are to Him, the more we can walk in that blessing, but the more His wisdom will operate and work through our lives. And we need wisdom in order to negotiate life, particularly when life's hard, but equally when everything seems to be going well. And so James opens with this wonderful affirming invitation. If any of you lack wisdom, he should ask God, who gives generously to all without finding fault. It will be given to him. I love that. Ask God, He'll give generously to everyone. There's no exceptions to this. And without fault finding or picking us up, and on all our times that we've messed up and failed or not listened previously. He doesn't nitpick, and it'll be given. But ask and trust. Don't doubt, just trust. Go ask and then proceed, and trust that He'll guide and give you that wisdom. If you don't do that, then and we give way to our temptation to double-mindedness, where we believe on the one hand and then we don't, then we end up not being able to receive of the wisdom and the guidance that He wants us to walk in. And he goes on through the book, and he just gives very practical advice, mainly in terms of attitude and relationships. Big emphasis that faith is a practical thing. It's demonstrated by a practical trust in God, and that involves risk, where you're banking on God coming through, and if God doesn't come through, you're stuffed. If it's in a situation of extremes, if he doesn't come through, you're stuck. But you're banking on, and that he's true to his word, he's true to his promises. He does indeed love us. He will indeed give us wisdom and guidance. So it's a practical trusting, giving over to him. And of course, in that requires humility. And he sees humility as the key to walking with God. And he's not alone in that. He's simply picking up one of the recurring emphasized themes right through the Old Testament. Right at the heart of sin is pride. It's unbelief and idolatry. Look at the story of Adam and Eve, and it's illustrated there in wanting to be like God, trying to be confident in self, not trusting God, and wanting to turn God into the kind of God that we'd like him to be, rather than really yielding and recognizing and receiving him as he is. I mean, we'd all like God to be like the way we want him to be. That's a natural instinct. We're all tempted to inappropriate estimations of ourselves and our opinions and so on and so forth. And pride is an issue. It's right there in every human heart. And this basic fundamental issue about trusting God, or trusting our wisdom or ourselves or other people, or maybe not trusting anything, these are issues. So they're all key here. But James recognizes that, and he is calling us to recognize the same. I put 3 verses here on the bottom of the sheet. The first is Micah 6. This is a verse that is one worth committing to memory. He's shown you, O man, as the word Adam, it's mankind. He's shown you, O mankind, what is good. He's shown you. And what does the Lord require of you? Well, boil it down in 3 things. Do justice, love mercy, walk humbly with your God. Do justice, love mercy, walk humbly with your God. See, the issue, and you see it, and this is the second bit, which comes immediately before the passage in James 4 that we read. God opposes the proud. He resists, but gives grace to the humble. Submit yourselves, therefore, to God. Resist the devil, he'll flee from you. Draw near to God, he will draw near to you. Humble yourselves before the Lord, and he will lift you up. James 4, 6-8, and then verse 10. God responds to the humble, but will not respond to pride. And that means we have to get down on our knees. We have to humble ourselves. And as we humble and submit ourselves to him, we are enabled to say no to the temptations of the enemy. And of course, when the more difficult life is and the more issues that we have to face, whatever it is in health or relationships or work or whatever, there's temptations come with that, and it's often difficult to know how to respond or to resist these so that we can do what's best and do the right thing. We cannot resist the enemy without that submission to God, because it's God who defeats the enemy, and he'll defeat the enemy through us. But as we bow to him, receiving him as he really is, not puffing ourselves up in an inappropriate attitudes, but just trusting him, the enemy will go. And just as we seek to draw near to him, God will draw near to us. And if you want God to exalt you, and goodness, who doesn't want to be lifted up in some way? Humble yourselves. The way to get up is to get down, if that makes sense. But his concern is wisdom. His concern, and this is fundamental to an understanding of wisdom. And if I could read this, and this is just putting the whole thing in context. We've already been over this passage in James 3, verse 13. Who is wise and understanding among you? Let him show it by his good life, by the deeds done, and note the phrase, in the humility that comes from wisdom. The humility that comes from wisdom. He goes on and he's immediately, he says, look, if you harbor bitter envy and selfish ambition in your hearts, don't boast about it or deny it, but recognize where it comes from. Such wisdom does not come from above, or it doesn't come from heaven, but it's of the earth, it's unspiritual, and ultimately demonic. It doesn't come from God. Because where you have envy and selfish ambition, you find disorder and every evil practice. So where there's that self-seeking, that grasping sense that is instinctive and natural to us, don't boast about it, but don't pretend it's not there either. Don't deny it. Don't deny the truth, but just recognize that we find naturally, instinctively rising up within us is not from God. The wisdom that God gives, and this is why it's so important that we understand this, because if we're going to negotiate through life, then we need to be able to start distinguishing, or get, the better we can distinguish between what's of God and what's just of us, or in fact even of the enemy, then the better we're able to negotiate the life that we have to live at this present time. So that's why he's talking about a recognition of the wisdom from below, if you like. Just recognize it's there, but recognize too that when God speaks and he's going to guide and give direction in your life, it is characterized by, and I've put this on the bottom of the sheet, it's the third quotation there, it's characterized by purity, and it's peace-loving, peace. It's considerate or gentle. It's reasonable. It's easily entreated. That one can make appeal to it. And it's full of mercy and good fruits. It's impartial. It's genuine. And that as we sow with this, in line with this, we didn't put this on, in peace, then we'll reap, maybe not straight away, but we will reap a harvest of righteousness in our lives. He goes on, he talks about then quarrels and they're coming from our desires and our passions and our opinions and our wanting our way and so on. And then it gets right down to this blunt statement about pride. God does give grace to the humble, and he does lift them up. And he talks, and we spent quite some time with this last week, looking at the last couple of weeks or so, about the way that pride manifests in terms of our temptation to judgment on others. That we set ourselves up in pride as if we are the one who can make a true and definitive estimation of who they are and what they're like and all the rest. And how that exposes us to the enemy. It does two things. Firstly, it means God has to say no to us, and will have to judge us by the same standard we use in judging others. But it exposes us to the temptations of the enemy. And this is why he's so concerned about that. And anyway, we've spent enough time looking at that. But then he goes on and he deals with the next issue, and this is our reading this morning, and we're just going to skim through this. He's talking about not our estimations of each other, setting ourselves up in pride, but our estimations about ourselves and our future plans and arrangements, setting ourselves up in pride. Listen, you who say, and I'm just reading what it says, today or tomorrow we'll go here to this or that city, spend a year there, carry on business, make some gain, make some money. Why? You don't know what will happen tomorrow. What is your life? He's calling here for an honest estimation. You don't know what the future is. You are a mist that appears for a little while and then vanishes. He's quite blunt here, isn't he? You're a mist. We're a mist that appears for a little while and vanishes. None of us know actually what the future holds. It's not that we shouldn't plan. Of course we should. We make our plans. We have our desires. We have our ambitions. And it's healthy and normal and good and thoroughly desirable that we have plans and a sense of direction. But we need humility in it. And it's that self-confidence that, where we feel all secure because we know exactly what's going to happen in the next little bit. Well, the reality is our security is in God. And we don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. Last year, when we were planning to go off on holiday, I was really, really looking forward to this is the end of June, to holiday and getting away. And Sophie was abroad. And I think I was really looking forward to spending some time with Daniel and Samuel. And then 4 days or whatever before we went away, I ruptured my Achilles. So yes, we still went off on holiday, but everything was suddenly changed, and it was out of the blue. The strongest tendon in your body, without warning, and being a tendon, it's the longest healing of any part of the body. It'd be far simpler to have broken the bone. Okay, that's some. There'll be umpteen other examples. Out of the blue, something happens. It just changes everything. We know that. And he's saying, look, live with that awareness. Just live with it. Our security is in God. But he'll give the wisdom, and he'll, as we need to know, when we need to know, to guide us through day by day. Don't put your trust in the security of your plans. Instead, you ought to say, and I'm quoting, if it's the Lord's will, we will live, and we will live, first of all, and do this or that. But as it is, you boast and brag, and look, all such boasting is of the evil one. Anyone who doesn't know the good he ought to do and doesn't do it. For that person, it's sin. We know this. Well, let's do it. Live like this. And actually, I think the implication of what he's saying is that actually, if we really live like this, there's a freedom in it. Because our security is in the rock of our salvation. It really is in God. It really, truly is in God. So it means especially when we don't know what's going to happen tomorrow, and we don't know what's going to happen next week, or we don't know how things are going to go with this loved one or that loved one, and there's times in our lives that there's an incredible insecurity, moment to moment. But if our security is really where it needs to be, then we're free in the uncertainty. And we can resist the devil because we're in submission to the grace and mercy, the love, the compassion, the presence of God. And now immediately he then goes on and he talks about wealth and misplaced confidence in what we have. And his language is just unremittingly blunt. And I've often felt reading James that I get the general sense, and then I think, but I'm sure I'm missing an awful lot in this. And so really, I'm just going to skim through this, and it's maybe something we need to spend a bit longer on. But let me just try and get the general sense. Listen, you rich people. Weep and wail because of the misery that's coming upon you. Your wealth is rotted. The moths have eaten your clothes. The gold and silver is corrupted. And that corruption will testify against you because it will eat your flesh like fire. And he's saying, look at these things in absolute stark honesty. Money and possessions is a value system. I mean, I am a natural hoarder. Okay, understand that. My wife isn't. We're very different. But you don't need to laugh so much, Daniel. Money is a value system. It attributes value to things. And if we love money, or we love possessions, then that affects our whole understanding of the order of importance of the various things in life. And of course, it doesn't put any value, because you can't put a value on God or on faith or on love, whether to God or to each other. Or, who can put a value in terms of, on the relationships maybe that they have with their friends or with certain members of their family? And then he's talking about, particularly those, the temptation, because we have these instinct to, with our personal ambition and so on. He raises questions about, he's talking in terms of a landowner, and so and hoarding wealth in the last days. Failing perhaps to honor other people who have worked, and giving them their due, and their needs and their prayers are also coming up before God. And he's got to hear your prayers and the prayers of those that you might have unjustly treated. The cries of the harvesters have reached the ears of the Lord Almighty. Here's the issue: you've lived on earth in luxury and self-indulgence, fattening yourselves. And this could be translated in two ways, but the way it is here is as in the day of slaughter. Condemned and murdering the righteous one. Question, does that refer to Christ or just the righteous generally? And you've not been opposed. You've had your free run of it. This morning, I've thought several times, and this morning was coming home fresh to me, and, because I was also thinking about the twinning thing that Amy was going to talk about. We live in luxury. I mean, if you ask me a question, am I rich? I would say no. Although, of course, that's all relative. But actually, if I ask myself the question, do I live in luxury? And I think of toilets, running water. We don't have to go out in the field. Some of us might have grown up with depending where you were staying, with a toilet at the bottom of the garden, or beside the house or the back of the house. You might have grown up with a toilet on the stair if you were living in a tenement. But we have running water. We're flushing toilets. We consider them a right. If it's not done properly, then we're on the phone and we're getting upset. It's basic stuff. And the vast, vast majority of the world, right through history, has never had that. The Romans did have a kind of thing like that in some places. But basically the world doesn't. Most of the world hasn't. Large sections of the world haven't got that either. We live in luxury. We really, really do. He goes on, and we have to finish, so I'm not going to unpack this, but he calls us to patience and trust. The harvest will come. Stand firm. The Lord is near. And then the final thing, and I'm just going to mention this, he's talked about our attitude to others, our attitude to our future and plans, our attitude to what we have and our possessions and our money, and then he's talking about the prideful way that we can speak, invoking God into a situation to bolster up our statements. And so he says, and this is the final thing, as I say, we don't have time to unpack it, do not swear. It doesn't mean don't use bad language, but don't make vows or invoke God into a situation. So don't swear by heaven, by earth, or by anything else. Let your yes be yes and your no be no. And let your yes be yes and your no be no, just straight and straightforward. Because even though we say our yes or we say our no, none of us knows what's going to happen tomorrow. None of us knows what the future holds. None of us knows how long the luxury we live in will last. And none of us is the ultimate judge of even ourselves or each other. A call, in fact, to faith and to live in the wisdom that God has promised that he'll give us as we seek to live and live well in our brief time on earth. Amen. Let's sing our next song.